Hey guys, so you may be wondering why Visual isn't here right now and where he is. He's currently on holiday, so I'm just going to be covering an upload for him. I know he's got some uploads that he filmed before he went, just so you know there shouldn't be too many missing uploads. So this is what I'm going to go through, just a really dumbed down version of this geometric style, which is really popular at the moment. It's just by using simple, rectangles, or it could be any shape, but I'm just going to go through rectangles and then gradients which overlap, and then it creates this cool look. So yeah, I'm also going to go through the finishing color correction on top of it, because I think in this sort of style that's half of the design alone, just the color corrections on top. Hopefully I don't go too quick, because that's what a lot of people say I do. So if you've literally just started using Photoshop like yesterday, I wouldn't recommend listening to me, because I'm not very good at explaining things. So first thing you want to do is create your canvas. I'm going to go through a Twitter header. Doesn't have to be, it could be a phone background or anything, but just put your dimensions here. With file new obviously, so I'm going to make it 3000 by 1000, which is twice as big in each dimension as a Twitter header. So Twitter headers are 1500 by 500, and I've just doubled them just so we have a bigger canvas to work on. Then click OK, and then here we go. So yeah, first thing I'm going to do, I always do this just to make sure everything's organised from the get-go, is press Ctrl R to get these rulers up here. And if they're already enabled, if you press Ctrl R, it will get rid of them. So you just toggle the rulers, make sure they're showing, and then drag from the top one down into the middle, and it should snap into place. There you go. You see it snaps into the middle, and then the same with this one here. So we have halfway points for the header. So what I'm going to do to start off with the background is press U on the keyboard, which brings you to the shape tool here. This is set to rectangle, but if you click and hold, you can see all the options you can have. So you don't have to use rectangles. I'm just going to go through that because I think that's the most simple to learn. If you'd rather not use keyboard shortcuts and you'd rather just select it on this side bit here, it's this one here. It just should be a rectangle, or any of these. As I said, click and hold and select the one you want. And then at the top here you have all the options for the shape. So I'm just going to set it to a red stroke of about 5. It doesn't really matter too much, but that means every time you add a new rectangle, it will have these settings already placed onto it. So the shape tool is really good to use for this, because every time you add a new shape like this, you can see on the layers window it creates new layers for each of the individual shapes. So you never have to worry about going over to your layers, clicking new, make a shape, clicking new, make a shape. You can just keep on dragging and it will keep on making new layers. So let's start. The first thing you want to do is literally spam spam rectangles across the entire page like this. Just make sure they're relatively spaced out. They're not too close together like this bit here. I think that's a bit too close. It's all about experimenting, really seeing what works. So I'm just going to press U to go back to the rectangle, and yeah, keep doing this. One thing I am keeping in mind is you don't have to fill everything up with a rectangle. I'm leaving some empty gaps like here. There's just little empty gaps. You don't have to fill them up. You can leave them blank as well. It leaves like a cool look. You can put something behind the rectangles after. So now you have all the rectangles. It looks a bit weird, but once we've added the gradients it will look fine. We'll fix it, don't worry. So now we want to set all of these rectangles to have a fill instead of an outline. So we're going to click the top rectangle, hold shift, scroll down to the bottom rectangle and click it, and that will select everything. And then press U again to go onto the shape tool, and then we can change all the settings for all of these rectangles that are selected up here. So I'm going to set it to a red fill, and then set the stroke to this line, which just means no stroke at all. So we now have all of these set to red, and all these white squares are just the empty gaps that we missed. So now all of these are filled red. If we just lower the opacity, you can start to see how they would overlap. So you can make some more changes here if you want to, like if you think this rectangle here, for example, could overlap too many, so you could make it smaller. It's all your choice, but I'm going to keep it how it is for now just to make it simple. And what I'm going to do is, while all of these are selected, I'm going to go to this fill option here and set it to 0%. And now they're all disappeared. But we have all these rectangles here which we can add gradients to. So I'm going to double click the top layer, which will bring you up to your layers option. And I am using an older version of Photoshop, so yours might be a darker colour, or it might look a bit different. But it's all the same. You just want to go to gradient overlay, make sure it's ticked. So you want to click this gradient box here and then go to the black to transparent one. If it doesn't show black to transparent, if it shows red to transparent, for example, you want to make sure your foreground color, this top color here, is set to black. For example, if it's red and you double click on the gradient overlay, the default is going to be red to transparent. So you just want to make sure this is black here. You could click this little black and white icon here to set the colors to black and white, and then again gradient overlay and black to transparent. Then click OK, and you're done. Obviously it's finished for one rectangle. You have to do it now for every single rectangle. But instead of double clicking and going to gradient overlay, you can just hold Alt, hover over where it says gradient overlay and drag it down. And that will drag the layer styles onto the next layer. This bit's a little bit tedious, but it should be fine. It won't take too long. Just hold Alt and drag to all of the layers. So there you go, there's all the gradients now added onto the rectangles. You can see it looks a lot better than the solid colours or the outlines. The good thing about this is because we haven't done it on all one layer, we've kept them separate and we've kept the rectangles as shapes. You can now move these individually. I'm just holding Control and clicking, which will get you onto the layer. Because I haven't got auto select ticked, which I would recommend not to have ticked because it gets annoying sometimes. If you hold Control, it sort of toggles auto select on. So if you hold Control and click, you now have auto select, and then if you let go, you can move the layer that you're selected on, if that makes sense. So I'm going to move about all the ones that I think may be too close or too big or too small. The other plus side to using this method is all of these are shape layers, which basically they work in vectors, which means that you can scale them however you want. For example, just do this, and if you hit tick, the layer style resets and you don't lose any quality of the layer. So you can literally play around with this however you want and it won't lose any quality, it won't be any different. So, and I think this is looking a bit better now. So I'm going to again highlight all of these layers by clicking the top one, going down to the bottom one, holding shift, clicking, and then press Control G on the keyboard, which groups them as a layer. So now they're all as a group. I'm just going to double click by hovering over group 1 and double clicking and then renaming it to shapes. So there you go. This is the shapes folder now. You can see it's all one folder. You can move them all as one big group. So this is where we're going to get the whole look of the header from. Just by using this one stock image, which is really easy to make, we can now make a header from it. All I'm going to do is make this bigger, Control T, and just drag one of these corners. I'm holding Shift and Alt, by the way. Holding Alt just makes it, you know, controllable from the center instead of from, if you don't hold Alt, it gets controlled from the opposite corner. Whereas if you hold Alt, you can see it gets control from the center. So yeah, and then I'm holding Shift to lock the aspect ratio of it. So if I let go of Shift, you can stretch it and warp it. If I hold Shift, it will stay as the same sizes as it was. So I'm just going to make it a bit bigger like that, and then hit this tick up here, which just confirms all the transformations you did. Now what I'm going to do is press Control J while highlighted on the shapes layer and hide the original one. Control J just duplicates it. So if you don't want to use shortcuts, again, right click and duplicate group. So usually if you want to merge a group, you just select it and press Control E. But if we do this, you can see if we press Control T to bring up the bounding box, it doesn't go past the layer preview, whatever you want to call it, the canvas. Whereas all the layers on here, they do go past it. So if we merge a group, it gets cropped, but we don't want it to crop. So what we want to do is, I'm just going to press Control J again to duplicate this, is instead of merging the group together, we want to open this group on this little triangle here, and we want to click this top rectangle, and we want to go Shift and bottom rectangle again just to select them all, right click and go to rasterize layers, which changes them from shape layers to just normal solid objects, and then right click and merge layers here. Or again, you want to press Control E to merge, then you can do. But now, as you can see, if I just drag this out the group and delete that because we don't need that anymore, if we press Control T, it now goes outside the border. So that's what we wanted, and now we can use this more freely. So I'm going to press Control J again to duplicate this, hide the original one. These are just as backups if you make a mistake and you want to go back to what you had before. So I'm going to make sure I'm highlighted on this visible layer, press Control T, hold Shift, and you want to go outside the box until you get this rotate icon for your mouse, and then hold Shift and rotate, and you see the number there is how many degrees it rotated. So I'm going to set it to 45 and hit tick, and I'm just going to set this to a position like there. Now what I'm going to do is duplicate this the other side and flip it horizontally. So an easy way to do this is, again, Control J to duplicate the layer, Control T. So if we right click while in transform mode, we have a few options that we can quickly make an edit to the layer. We want to flip it horizontally because that goes from right to left or left to right. If you flip vertically, it goes up to down or down to up. So yeah, flip horizontally like that. And when you're dragging this, you want the intersection between the two layers to be in the middle of the canvas. Yeah, it sounds complicated, but basically I'm going to show my ruler, sorry, by pressing Control and that button next to L, I don't know what it's called, and then zoom in on the ruler and just move this to the left and make sure where the two layers meet, as you can see there's an intersection here, is in the middle of the canvas. So now it's now centered perfectly. By the way, when I was moving that layer, I was holding shift again just to lock it to certain angles. If you don't hold shift, you may cause them to go out of line. If you want it to be symmetrical, then definitely hold shift. So now we have these two layers which we can select as one by pressing the top one, just making sure it's selected over the layers here, holding Control, clicking that one, and then we can now move them as one. So just want to find a good position where it looks good. This one here I think this is the best one out of all of them. Yeah, I think so. So that's the one I'm going to go with. Now I'm going to keep this little rectangle box here in the middle, because that might be good to place the logo in later on. So again, it's centered now, and there we go. There's the main stock done. So when you're at this point, you can leave the colors as they are, just black and white. It still looks good, but now I'm going to show you how to change the colors to whatever you want. So down here where this image adjustments is, this sort of half-filled circle, you want to click that and it brings up all of these, and then you want to go to the second from last one, which says gradient map. Just click that, and this is where we're going to change the colors. So it should bring up this window once you selected gradient map, and again just click on this gradient here, which now brings up this window, which now we can edit the gradient map. So basically what the gradient map does is this, I don't know what to call it, this color here is the shadows and the darker parts of the canvas, and this is the lighter parts of the canvas. So if we double click this black and change it to red, it changes all the dark parts to red, while all the whites are still the same. As you can see, they're still white. If we change this white to green, all these green turn to white. So that's basically the whole premise behind the gradient map. So I'm just going to select black and white again, and I'm going to change this black to sort of a dark blue, like that, make it a bit pale. And this is where you can experiment on your own with all the colours you want to use, and this is where it becomes your own sort of header really. Just going to make this light blue like that. So I think that looks good, and then I'm going to click OK, and as you can see we've got dark blue to light blue. Hit OK and just close this gradient map window. So now before and after. Before it was just black and white, after we've got some colour into it. So this is the part where I go over more advanced techniques of how to add logo and stuff. If you want to skip this part and just go straight to the colour correction, then skip to this time frame and I'll take you there. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is just put this logo here in the middle and press Control, the button next to L. I need to know what this is called because I can't keep saying Control next to L. Anyway, yeah, click that and it just makes sure the logo is centered with the bounding box there, like that. And because we have this whole rectangle theme, what I'm going to do is make a new layer underneath the logo. Just click underneath the logo and click the new layer down here, and go to the shape tool again, or press U, and then add a square. Now instead of making a rectangle, if you want to make it a perfect square, again hold shift to lock the aspect ratio, and there you go, it's always a square no matter where your mouse is. So I'm just going to make a square like this, and then set the stroke to nothing, and set the fill to... Actually, instead of coming up here for a colour, I'm just going to go here and select the foreground colour. I think for this rectangle I'm going to have it like a dark blue but more pale, and maybe darker like that. I think that should work. And then if I go up here, the custom colour that we just added on the foreground colour down here is now in this window here, recently used colours. So I'm going to click that and go to the cursor tool here, or just press V on the keyboard, which is a shortcut for that. Press Ctrl T and rotate it 45 degrees with the rest of the header. Hit enter just to confirm the changes, and I'm just going to put that there like that, I guess. And I'm also going to make sure this is centered as well because that's important. And there you go, just hide them. Now this is where again there's more experimentation. You don't have to do what I'm doing, I'm just showing you how I did it just in case you wanted to replicate what I'm doing or whatever. So yeah, I'm going to add a white stroke onto it and then get this visual logo and just make it a bit smaller and just make sure it looks centered like that. And I might also change this color here. Once you have the rectangle placed as well, I forgot to mention you can double click this small tiny rectangle here, and you can change the colour this way as well. So probably the easy way to do it. But I'm just going to make sure it's matched up to the rest of the blues there. There you go. Now instead of having a flat colour here, this flat blue, I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to make a clipping mask to this layer. So to create a clipping mask, which basically just means whatever you brush onto this layer only affects the layer underneath it. As I said, it's complicated. If you hold Alt and click in between the two layers, you'll get this icon here, which is just a square and an arrow pointing downwards. So once you see that, you know that they're going to clip together. So click that, and there you go. Now whatever you brush on, I'm just going to select a black brush to show you. So say I just dab there, it only affects what is inside the rectangle. So now I'm just going to make the brush as soft as possible, 0% hardness, and set it to white and make it big like this. So you could edit the brush size in this window here, but what I like to do is hold Alt and right click, and if you drag to the left or to the right, it increases the size, and then if you drag up and down like this, it increases or decreases the hardness. So that's an easier and quicker way of seeing how big your brush is and editing it quickly. So just going to make it soft, and actually I'm going to make it quite big with a white brush and just click inside like that. I'm going to make it smaller actually, I think that's too much, so I'm going to make it smaller. Click Ctrl Z to undo what I just placed, click, and that's a better size there. Then I'm going to change the blending mode from normal, so up here normal, change it to overlay, which will give it a lighter blue colour like that, and just lower the opacity because it is a bit strong. And there you go, there is the rectangle in the middle. Now it may be a bit saturated compared to the backing, so I'm just tweaking it at this point, which is what I recommend you to do as well. I'm going to make it a bit less saturated and maybe a bit lighter, but that, like that, looks fine. Then just tweak this upwards. So now onto the CC. We've added the logo, we've added a rectangle with a white border, etc, etc. Now onto the colour correction. So what I'm going to do, this is what I recommend always to do. Curves and colour balance are the two main colour correction adjustment layers. That was a hard one to say, but you want to go down to this half filled circle again, click it, and now instead of going gradient map, you want to click curves up here. Just click curves like that, and this is the window you want. Now with a CC like this, curves is just to increase the contrast. You could use levels if you're familiar with that. I just prefer curves because you get more freedom with how you adjust the lighting. Near the top of the line, sort of the top quarter, create a point and drag it upwards, and then near the bottom quarter of the line, down here somewhere, you want to click and hold a point and drag it downwards. This is what's called an S-curve. It's basically the, you know, the go-to curves shape. So it basically increases the highlights, so it makes them brighter, and then this decreases the shadows, just makes them darker. So as you can see, before and after, if I just close this curves and then hide this layer, that's before and that's after the curves. It just creates a nice contrast to it, and yeah, it just makes the colours pop a lot more. Now what I'm going to do is add the colour balance. So again, adjustment layers, and this time colour balance. Then I'm going to set these midtones here, where it says midtones, to shadows, and I'm going to work my way down. So if you haven't used colour balance before, you could easily just go one by one through each of these and just play around with these levels, and whatever looks best, go with it. That's basically what I'm going to do, but I'm going to purposefully tone up the blues because it's a blue colour scheme, and then tone up the greens a bit because it might, yeah, it will give like a sapphire blue sort of feel. And I'm going to up the cyans a bit. It's all about messing about. So I think that looks good for the shadows. Now I'm going to click this again and go to midtones, and this time just up the cyans and the greens and less of the dark blues, or maybe more so. Yeah, that looks good. Now the last thing I'm going to do is add a vignette. Basically what that is, it's seen in photography, but it's used in Twitter headers to sort of focus on the middle, is like a dark edge, I guess you could say. But instead of having it darker, we're going to have it lighter, because as you can see, the edges of these rectangles start to get lighter around the edge. So I'm just going to, you know, make that more apparent. So again, creating a new layer, sorry I forgot to say, create a new layer and make it on the top. And then I'm going to set the colour of my brush to this light blue, the lightest blue I can find around there. And by the way, the shortcut for the eyedropper tool, which is just to select a colour on the canvas like this, is I on the keyboard. But if you're in your brush tool and you hold Alt, you can, you know, hold every time you're holding Alt, it will bring up the color tool, and then if you let go of Alt it will go back to your brush. So it's a quick way of getting different colour brushes. So hold Alt and I'm going to click this light blue, and then I'm going to zoom out for this because I'll need a very big brush and very soft as well. And I'm just going to click around the edges like that, and click around this edge as well until there you go. Now once you've done this, it may sort of leak into the middle a bit. I think it has in this case. Basically with the brushes, because they're so big, it may sort of spill into the middle and make everything lighter instead of just the edges. So I'm just going to go to the eraser tool by pressing E, and then it will come up on this tool here, just the eraser tool. Then I'm going to make that big and make it 0% hardness as well, and just click where I don't want the vignette to affect. So I think this is big enough. So as you can see, if I start to click, it will make the middle darker and the vignette won't affect that as much. Now it's a bit strong at the moment, so I'm just going to tone it down like that. Now I've created this vignette, I'm just going to drag the layer underneath the color correction so it affects that as well. And it's made it a bit stronger now doing that, so I'm just going to lower the opacity a little bit as well, like that. And now I'm going to go to the top layer and add a hue and saturation. So if you're happy with the color correction, you don't need to do this, but as you can see, because it's all the same sort of blue color scheme, if you now rotate the hue like this, it will change the colors for you. So it's an easy way to edit them. So I'm just going to adjust the blues to a lighter, more green blue, I guess, like that. As you can see, it's only -6, but if you see before and after, it makes a subtle difference. Now we have that, I'm just going to add a final curves layer onto it because I think that the dark tones could be pushed down a little bit. So I'm just going to solidify the highlights there and just push the darks down like that, and then maybe push the highlights up a little bit. But there you go. The final thing you want to do, this is just the final effects of the layer. This is a long shortcut to remember, so you don't have to do this. This is just the quickest way to do it. If you hold Control, Alt, Shift and E, it will create a new layer, which is just everything on the canvas merged into one layer. If you don't want to remember that, which is fair enough, you don't have this. It's a long shortcut to remember. Select the top layer of your file, hold Shift and select the bottom layer, the very bottom layer. Even if it's locked, it doesn't matter. So just make sure everything is selected. Press Control J to duplicate them, and then Control E to merge them. And now you've just done the same thing without that massive long shortcut. Now we have this as a separate layer, we can start to add filters and such just onto the layer as a whole. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Filter at the top here, and I'm just going to add a bit of noise. I'm going to actually add a lot of noise because I think it looks quite good with this style. I think that's actually good there, that amount. And I'm not going to have it all this rainbow coloured noise actually. I'm going to set it to monochromatic. I'm just going to keep that ticked, which just sets it to black and white. And it gives this sort of cool grainy texture to it. So I think around 10, 9 maybe. Just a subtle. It looks subtle, but when you zoom in, it is quite strong. But that, I think that, complements the style well. So now we have that noise. The last thing I'm going to do is duplicate the layer. So again, Control J, just this top layer here with everything merged. And I'm going to double click it to go to your layer styles. So when you double click a layer, the default window it brings up is this one where it says blending options default, and on here you should see advanced blending, and where it says channels RGB, red, green and blue is what that stands for. You just want to untick red and click OK. And now if you move this layer, if we zoom in just to see the effect more dramatically, if we move this top layer to the left a bit, you can see that's a way to do the RGB split. Visual taught me that, so shout out him on his own channel. Just shout. It shouldn't be too noticeable from afar, but there you go. So that is it for the header tutorial. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully I didn't go too fast. I did try to keep it as simple and dumbed down as possible, but if you do need any help, then I'll put my Twitter on the screen. Just hit me up on Twitter. I will try to answer any questions you have, because my fault for not explaining it well enough. I understand, but just keep in mind Visual, depending on when you're watching this, is on holiday, so try not to contact him as much, but once he's back I'm sure he'll be happy to help. But I also filmed another video on my channel where it's just like this one, where you don't use any stocks to create your own header, just creating your own header through shapes and stuff. So this is the effect I went through on my channel. If you do want to check it out, then you know it may help you just like this one did, hopefully. But yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe to Visual, shout out you, and yeah, peace.